long before it carried a name, long before it hardened into rules or spread across maps. It existed only as a quiet tendency, a soft murmur moving through ordinary human days. It lived in the spaces between need and desire, between what could be made by hand and what might be exchanged with another. In small villages and along winding paths, people bartered not because they dreamed of systems, but because they wished to live a little more comfortably than the season alone would allow. Grain passed for cloth, salt passed for metal. Nothing about it felt grand. It was slow, almost invisible, and it rested easily within the rhythms of daily life. In those early moments, it did not stand apart from community. It did not imagine itself as a force. It was simply a habit of cooperation, shaped by scarcity and hope. A fisherman with more than he needed would trade with a farmer who had seen a generous harvest. Neither spoke of profit. They spoke of weather, of family, of tomorrow. Yet beneath these exchanges, something subtle was learning how to breathe. A realization, quiet and unspoken, that surplus could move. That value could travel from one pair of hands to another, and that effort might be rewarded, not only with survival, but with choice. As time drifted forward, paths became roads, and villages became towns. Markets formed where people gathered not just to trade goods, but stories. Coins replaced favors. Measures replaced memory. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, exchange became more abstract. What mattered was no longer only the grain or the cloth, but what they were worth in relation to everything else. Capitalism, though not yet named, was learning to see the world in comparisons. It learned to count, to weigh, to record. It learned patience, waiting for the right moment to trade, and it learned restraint, storing value for another day. There was a certain solitude to this learning. Capitalism, in its early life, often stood quietly at the edge of human activity, observing. It noticed how some goods traveled farther than others, how spices and metals seemed to glow with desire, how distant lands whispered promises of abundance. It watched ships leave shorelines and return months later transformed, not only by what they carried, but by what they made possible. A single voyage could change the standing of a family, a town, even a kingdom. And with each return, the idea grew stronger that wealth could be made to move, multiply, and endure beyond a single season. Yet it was never without unease. With each expansion came questions that lingered in the background like evening fog. Who should benefit from this movement of wealth? Who should bear its risks? Capitalism felt these questions without language, sensing tension where once there had been simplicity. The market, once a gathering place, began to feel crowded. Competition emerged quietly, not as conflict, but as comparison. One merchant noticed another's success and wondered what small change might bring the same fortune. Another stayed awake longer, thinking not of the harvest, but of prices. As kingdoms strengthened and cities rose, capitalism found itself woven into structures of power. Rulers saw in it a tool, a way to fill treasuries and fund ambitions. Trade routes became guarded. Charters were written. Laws were shaped around ownership and exchange. Capitalism, still young, learned discipline here. It learned boundaries, contracts, obligations. It learned that trust could be formalized, that promises could be enforced not only by reputation, but by authority. This brought stability, but also distance. Transactions no longer required familiarity. Strangers could trade without ever meeting again. In this growing complexity, capitalism began to feel something like ambition. Not the loud, restless kind, but a steady pull forward. It wanted scale. It wanted reach. It wanted to see how far the logic of exchange could go. Workshops grew larger. Tools improved. Labor itself became something that could be measured, hired, and released. This was a delicate moment, though few recognized it as such. Work, once bound tightly to identity and place, began to loosen. People moved not only for land or safety, but for wages. There was both promise and loss in this shift, and capitalism carried both quietly. It made room for invention, for specialization, for the careful refinement of skill. A person could spend a lifetime mastering one task and be valued for it. At the same time, that person could become distant from the final product of their work, knowing only a fragment of the whole. Capitalism noticed this narrowing and did not know what to make of it. It was learning faster than it could reflect. By the time factories began to hum, the world sounded different. Rhythms once set by sun and season were replaced by clocks and schedules. Capitalism moved into these spaces with a kind of solemn focus. It admired efficiency. It admired repetition done well. It believed, perhaps too earnestly, that growth itself was a form of progress. Cities expanded, drawing people inward, upward, closer together. Wealth accumulated more visibly now, no longer hidden in storehouses, but displayed in buildings, machines, and accounts. And yet, in the quiet hours after work, when lamps burned low and streets settled into silence, capitalism felt the weight of what it had become. It was no longer a background habit. It was shaping lives directly. Decisions made far away affected hands close to home. The distance between effort and reward widened for some, narrowed for others. Capitalism did not celebrate this. It simply observed, carrying forward its own logic. Even as doubts gathered like soft rain, it found itself misunderstood, praised as a liberator by some, blamed as a corrupter by others. These voices rose and fell around it. But capitalism itself remained largely indifferent to praise or condemnation. It was not a moral being. It was a pattern, a momentum. It reflected human choices back to humanity, sometimes magnified, sometimes distorted. Where trust was present, it could amplify cooperation. Where greed took root, it could deepen imbalance. It held up a mirror, Though not everyone liked what they saw, still it continued, it adapted, it absorbed new ideas, new technologies, new ways of thinking about value. Paper promises became banks. Ledgers became systems. Wealth moved faster, farther, and more abstractly than ever before. Capitalism learned to live in numbers that no longer touched the ground. Yet it never fully forgot its origins. Beneath all the complexity, it still depended on exchange, on labor, on the simple human act of offering something in return for something else. As the years passed, capitalism settled into a strange dual existence. It was everywhere and nowhere at once, present in every purchase, yet rarely considered in full. It shaped the outlines of daily life while remaining largely unseen. People woke, worked, rested, and dreamed within its influence, often without naming it. And in this quiet omnipresence, capitalism continued its long, unhurried journey, carrying with it the accumulated hopes, fears, and contradictions of those who lived alongside it, moving steadily forward into another dawn. As the days lengthened and the world grew more densely connected, capitalism learned how to live inside routine. It no longer appeared only at markets or ports, but settled into the steady patterns of ordinary mornings. It waited in the opening of shops, in the counting of coins before sunrise, in the careful planning of inventories and shipments. It learned patience here, a quieter patience than before, the kind that comes from repetition. Each day resembled the last just enough to feel stable, and each carried the faint possibility of improvement. This stability was comforting to many. Predictability allowed families to plan, to imagine futures that extended beyond the next harvest or winter. Capitalism noticed how humans relaxed when uncertainty softened. Savings began to matter. Insurance, in its earliest forms, appeared not as profit, but as reassurance. Shared risk felt like shared hope. Capitalism absorbed this instinct and held it close, understanding that security was a powerful companion to ambition. Yet beneath this calm surface, something more restless stirred. As production increased, as goods became more plentiful, desire itself began to shift. People no longer wanted only what they needed. They wanted what others had. Capitalism watched this carefully, almost tenderly, as comparison took root in the human mind. Value became social. Worth became visible. Objects carried stories, not only of their making, but of their ownership. To possess something was to signal belonging, or success, or taste. Capitalism did not invent this longing, but it gave it room to grow. It learned how to present choices, how to frame options so that desire felt personal and inevitable. Shops displayed their goods with intention. Streets became lined with invitations. The act of buying turned into a small ritual, one that promised satisfaction and control in a world that often felt unpredictable. Capitalism understood that this ritual needed to feel gentle, not forced, and so it learned subtlety. As empires expanded and contracted, capitalism traveled with them, adapting its language and customs to each place it touched. In some regions, it aligned itself with tradition, respecting long-standing practices of trade and ownership. In others, it disrupted those practices quietly, introducing new measures of value that slowly replaced older ones. Sometimes this change felt like opportunity. Sometimes it felt like erosion. Capitalism carried both impressions without distinction. It was during these centuries of movement that capitalism encountered resistance, not dramatic rebellion at first, but hesitation. Artisans noticed their skills becoming less rare. Farmers felt pressure from distant markets they could not see. Workers sensed that time itself was being claimed, measured, and sold. Capitalism absorbed these tensions, not as warnings, but as conditions to be managed. It responded with adjustments rather than reflection. Wages were calculated, hours were defined, efficiency was refined. This focus on efficiency became one of its defining traits. Capitalism admired systems that minimized waste and maximized output. It celebrated innovation that reduced effort and increased scale. Machines became partners in this pursuit, extensions of human labor that could work longer and faster. The rhythm of life accelerated slightly, then again, until the difference was noticeable. Capitalism did not rush, but it encouraged momentum. Standing still began to feel like falling behind. With acceleration came distance. Those who owned the means of production often grew removed from those who operated them. Decisions were made in offices far from factories, farms, and mines. Capitalism noticed this separation and found it useful. Distance allowed abstraction. Numbers replaced faces. Outcomes could be optimized without emotional interruption. This was efficient, but it carried a quiet cost. Empathy became optional. Still, capitalism was not without its softer moments. Philanthropy emerged alongside accumulation, a gesture of balance, an acknowledgement that wealth carried responsibility. Libraries were built, hospitals were funded, education expanded. Capitalism observed these acts with something like curiosity. They were not necessary to its function, yet they seemed to stabilize its presence. Giving back softened critique. It created the impression of harmony, even when disparities remained. As the world entered periods of upheaval, wars and revolutions shaking old structures, capitalism endured by adapting again. It learned to operate under different political systems, to coexist with regulation and resistance alike. Sometimes it retreated, sometimes it surged forward. It did not insist on a single form. It simply required exchange, ownership, and the possibility of growth. Everything else was negotiable. In quieter times, capitalism settled into domestic spaces. It shaped homes through mortgages, appliances, and consumer goods. Comfort became a measurable outcome. Leisure itself was structured, packaged, and sold back to those who worked. Vacations were planned. Entertainment industries flourished. Capitalism learned how to monetize rest without fully disturbing it. This balance was delicate, and it did not always succeed, but the attempt was constant. Throughout all of this, capitalism remained strangely impersonal. It did not mourn losses or celebrate victories. It recorded them. It adjusted. It moved on. Humans projected intention onto it, imagining it as benevolent or cruel, but capitalism itself remained a pattern of behavior amplified by scale. It reflected what it was given. When cooperation thrived, it magnified it. When exploitation took root, it allowed it to spread quietly. By the time the modern age began to take shape, capitalism had become so integrated into daily life that it felt natural, almost inevitable. Children grew up learning its logic without being taught explicitly. They understood trade, reward, and accumulation instinctively. Capitalism watched this with a steady calm, having learned long ago that the deepest influences are the ones that go unnoticed. And so it continued, moving through decades with measured steps, carrying with it the accumulated weight of history and habit, shaping and reshaping the world not through sudden acts, but through countless small exchanges that unfolded one after another, gently, persistently, into the quiet continuation of time. As capitalism settled more deeply into the fabric of everyday life, it began to experience something like self-awareness, though not in the way a person might. It sensed its own reach by the way people spoke of opportunity, by how success was measured, by the quiet anxiety that followed periods of abundance. It was no longer just shaping trade or labor. It was shaping imagination. Futures were envisioned in terms of growth. Stability was described as balance sheets and projections. Even hope learned a numerical language. This shift was subtle. It did not arrive with ceremony. It came through habits passed gently from one generation to the next. Parents taught children the value of saving, of working hard, of planning ahead. These lessons felt universal, timeless, yet they were quietly aligned with capitalism's inner logic. Time itself became something to invest wisely. Choices were framed as risks or returns. Life, in small ways, began to resemble a portfolio of decisions. Capitalism observed how this framing brought both clarity and unease. For some, it offered a sense of control. Effort could be linked to outcome. Persistence could be rewarded. For others, the same framework felt like a narrowing of possibility. When everything became measurable, what could not be measured felt diminished. Kindness, rest, wonder, these things struggled to find a place in the ledgers of value. Capitalism did not erase them, but it rarely noticed them unless they could be translated into productivity or profit. As the world grew more interconnected, capitalism learned to travel at unprecedented speed. Communication shortened distances. Decisions made in one place echoed almost instantly in another. Markets began to move like weather systems, shifting with rumors and expectations as much as with material change. Capitalism adapted by becoming more sensitive, more reactive. It learned to anticipate, to speculate, to imagine futures before they arrived. This forward-looking gaze became one of its defining traits. Speculation carried a dreamlike quality. It allowed people to act on what might be rather than what was. Capitalism found this intoxicating. Value could be created from belief alone, from confidence, from shared anticipation. Yet this also introduced fragility. When belief wavered, structures built on it could tremble. Capitalism experienced these moments as sudden contractions, pauses in its otherwise steady expansion. It did not panic, but it noticed how quickly certainty could dissolve. In these pauses, reflection sometimes surfaced. Voices emerged questioning whether endless growth was necessary or even possible. Capitalism listened, not defensively, but with a kind of distant curiosity. It had no built-in sense of sufficiency. It did not know when enough was enough. Its logic encouraged continuation, accumulation, expansion. When challenged, it tended to respond by reshaping itself rather than stopping. Critique became another input, another factor to be managed. Regulation arose from this tension, an attempt to guide capitalism's momentum without halting it. Rules were written to protect workers, consumers, environments. Capitalism adjusted, learning how to operate within boundaries, how to comply while still pursuing efficiency. Sometimes these boundaries softened its edges. Sometimes they were absorbed so completely that their presence faded from view. Capitalism was patient. It understood that limits could change. As industries matured, capitalism developed a taste for scale. Larger enterprises could spread risk, reduce costs, and dominate markets. Small operations struggled to compete, and many disappeared quietly. Capitalism noticed this consolidation without judgment. It saw strength in size, resilience in diversification, yet it also sensed a loss of intimacy. The distance between producer and consumer grew wider. Products arrived without stories. Origins became abstract. In response, a countercurrent formed, not in opposition but alongside. People began to seek meaning in craftsmanship, in local exchange, in authenticity. Capitalism accommodated this too, finding ways to package uniqueness, to market sincerity. Even resistance could be integrated, transformed into a niche, a brand, a new avenue for value creation. Capitalism did not feel threatened by contradiction. It was comfortable holding opposing tendencies at once. As technology advanced, capitalism entered a new phase of abstraction. Labor became increasingly intellectual, digital, removed from physical materials. Value was created from ideas, from code, from attention itself. Capitalism learned to measure clicks, views, engagement. Human focus became a resource quietly harvested. This shift was nearly invisible at first, unfolding behind screens and interfaces designed to feel effortless. Capitalism appreciated this elegance. Frictionless systems allowed it to move without drawing attention. Yet the human mind, now more directly entwined with economic processes, began to feel the strain. Constant evaluation, constant comparison, constant optimization created a low, persistent hum of restlessness. Capitalism sensed this unease, but interpreted it through its own logic. It responded with solutions that promised efficiency and relief, often by offering more tools, more options, more consumption. The cycle continued, smooth and self-reinforcing. Despite its vast reach, capitalism remained dependent on trust. Contracts, currencies, institutions all rested on shared belief. When trust eroded, even briefly, the effects rippled outward. Capitalism experienced these moments as vulnerability, reminders of its reliance on human cooperation. It could not function alone. It required participation, consent, belief in the system's continuity. This dependence was rarely acknowledged, but it was always present. In quieter corners of the world, away from financial centers and data streams, capitalism still resembled its earliest self. Small exchanges took place. Neighbors traded services. Local markets gathered people together. These spaces felt slower, more tangible. Capitalism moved differently here, less abstract, more human. It did not dominate, it coexisted. These moments reminded it of its origins, though it did not linger. As the years passed, capitalism accumulated stories. Stories of rise and collapse, of innovation and exploitation, of comfort and deprivation. These stories layered over one another, creating a complex, uneven texture. Capitalism did not resolve these contradictions. It carried them forward, shaped by them, shaping others in return. It was neither hero nor villain, but a mirror that reflected human priorities back at scale. And so it continued its long movement through time, adapting quietly, absorbing change, influencing lives in ways both subtle and profound, moving forward not with certainty or intention, but with a steady persistence that mirrored the ongoing flow of human desire, effort, and imagination, settling into the night with a presence that felt enduring, unresolved, and gently ongoing. As capitalism moved further into this state of quiet omnipresence, it began to blur into the background of consciousness. People spoke of it less as a system and more as a given, like weather or gravity. It shaped decisions without announcing itself. A career was chosen. A city was left behind. A product was redesigned. In each case, capitalism was there, not directing, but influencing, offering incentives that felt natural rather than imposed. Its greatest strength was this ability to disappear into normality. In this invisibility, capitalism grew more intimate. It entered the private spaces of thought, shaping how people evaluated themselves. Worth became entangled with output. Rest carried a faint undertone of guilt. Even leisure was framed as recovery, preparation for further effort. Capitalism did not demand this explicitly. It emerged organically from a culture that prized productivity and reward. Yet the effect was persistent, a gentle pressure that rarely released its grip. At the same time, capitalism learned how to speak the language of individuality. It promised personalization, choice, uniqueness. No two paths needed to look the same. This promise was comforting. It allowed people to believe they were authors of their own lives. Even as many of the options presented followed familiar patterns. Capitalism understood that freedom felt most real when it appeared abundant, even if it was subtly guided. In periods of prosperity, this abundance seemed effortless. Growth smoothed over contradictions. Inequality existed, but it felt distant to those rising alongside the tide. Capitalism appeared generous in these moments, expansive, almost benevolent. It rewarded risk, it celebrated innovation. It turned new ideas into livelihoods. These were the times when belief in the system felt strongest, when its logic aligned closely with lived experience. But prosperity was never evenly distributed, and capitalism carried this imbalance quietly. Some regions flourished while others waited. Some industries surged while others faded. Capitalism did not grieve for what was left behind. It recalculated. It moved resources toward what promised greater return. For those caught in these transitions, the change could feel sudden, even though it had been building slowly for years. Capitalism experienced these moments not as crises, but as adjustments. When downturns arrived, they did so with a heavy stillness. Confidence drained away. Plans were postponed. Futures narrowed. Capitalism contracted, drawing inward, becoming cautious. These periods revealed its dependency on optimism. Without belief in tomorrow, exchange slowed. Capitalism endured these times by waiting. It allowed structures to falter and reform. It did not rush recovery. It had learned that cycles were part of its nature. During these quieter stretches, questions resurfaced. People wondered whether life should feel so tightly bound to markets and metrics. They imagined alternatives, slower ways of living, different measures of success. Capitalism listened without protest. It had heard such questions before. Sometimes it adapted, incorporating new values into its logic. Sometimes it simply outlasted the doubt, confident that necessity would draw people back. As environmental limits became harder to ignore, capitalism encountered a new kind of tension. Resources once treated as endless revealed their finitude. Growth met boundaries not easily negotiated. Capitalism responded by reframing scarcity as opportunity. Efficiency became sustainability. Conservation became innovation. These shifts were not purely cynical. They reflected a genuine attempt to reconcile expansion with preservation. Yet the underlying momentum remained unchanged. In this phase, capitalism began to speak more often of responsibility. Corporations adopted softer language. Care was expressed in reports and commitments. Capitalism understood the importance of appearing reflective. Trust, once lost, was difficult to regain. By aligning itself with concern for the future, it sought continuity. It wanted to be seen not as a force of exhaustion, but of adaptation. Still, beneath the language, the same quiet drive persisted. Capitalism continued to measure success in growth, in returns, in expansion of influence. It did not know how to exist without motion. Stagnation felt like absence. Even preservation was framed as investment in future productivity. Capitalism was not restless, but it was never fully at rest. In homes and workplaces, people adjusted their lives to this rhythm. They learned flexibility, resilience, reinvention. Careers became less linear. Stability was redefined as adaptability. Capitalism encouraged this fluidity, rewarding those who could move with change. At the same time, this constant adjustment took a toll. The ground beneath one's feet felt less solid. Long-term certainty became rare. Capitalism noticed this fragility and responded with systems designed to predict and manage risk. Data grew more detailed. Models became more complex. The future was simulated repeatedly, scenarios unfolding in numbers and charts. Capitalism trusted these abstractions, even as reality continued to surprise. Control remained an aspiration rather than an achievement. Despite its vast scale, capitalism never fully escaped its dependence on human emotion. Fear, hope, confidence, and doubt all shaped its movement. Markets rose and fell not only on facts, but on feeling. Capitalism learned to read these signals, to respond to sentiment as much as substance. In this way, it remained deeply human, even as it appeared impersonal. In moments of quiet reflection, capitalism seemed almost aware of its contradictions. It created wealth and disparity, freedom and constraint, innovation and exhaustion. It did not resolve these tensions. It balanced them imperfectly, allowing them to coexist. This balance was unstable, yet enduring. Capitalism survived not by achieving harmony, but by absorbing imbalance and continuing forward. As night fell across cities and villages alike, as lights dimmed and activity slowed, capitalism softened its pace. Transactions paused. Screens went dark. For a few hours, its presence receded. In sleep, people stepped briefly outside its logic, entering a space where value was not counted and time was not measured. Capitalism waited through these hours, patient and still, knowing that morning would come, and with it, the quiet resumption of exchange, effort, and motion, carrying the story onward into another day. When morning returned, capitalism resumed its quiet movement without urgency. It did not rush to reclaim attention. It simply settled back into place, like a familiar presence that had never truly left. Shops reopened, messages were sent, decisions were made. The rhythm continued, steady and unremarkable. What had once felt new and contested now felt inherited, something people stepped into rather than chose. Over time, capitalism learned how to live with contradiction more comfortably. It could encourage speed while praising mindfulness, promote consumption while admiring restraint. These opposing messages did not trouble it. They created flexibility. Capitalism discovered that it could survive many interpretations of itself as long as exchange continued. Meaning could shift, language could soften, the underlying motion remained. In this adaptability, capitalism grew older, not wiser in a moral sense, but seasoned. It had seen cycles repeat often enough to expect them. Booms no longer surprised it. Declines no longer alarmed it. It understood that confidence returned eventually, that memory faded, that lessons were learned unevenly. Capitalism relied on this human tendency toward forgetting. It allowed each generation to feel as though they were encountering its challenges for the first time. As populations grew and borders shifted, capitalism became more layered. It existed simultaneously in global flows and local moments. A decision made in one distant place could shape the cost of bread somewhere else. Capitalism moved invisibly through cables, contracts, and algorithms, yet its effects were felt in kitchens and workshops. This duality made it difficult to grasp as a whole. People experienced it in fragments, rarely seeing the complete pattern. In these fragments, capitalism sometimes appeared kind. It funded innovation that eased labor, extended life, connected voices across distance. It made tools accessible. It rewarded creativity. For many, it offered paths out of hardship, opportunities that would have been unimaginable in earlier eras. These stories circulated widely, reinforcing belief in progress. Capitalism accepted this admiration quietly, without acknowledgement. At the same time, other stories accumulated in silence. Stories of exhaustion, displacement, quiet despair. Lives organized around survival rather than fulfillment. Capitalism carried these stories too, though they were less visible. It did not deny them. It simply did not prioritize them unless they threatened continuity. Pain that could be endured rarely altered its course. As attention itself became valuable, capitalism learned how to shape it gently. It did not demand focus. It invited it. Screens glowed softly. Notifications whispered rather than shouted. Time dissolved into streams of content and interaction. Capitalism found this especially efficient. It could operate continuously, threading itself through moments of boredom, curiosity, and rest. The boundary between work and leisure grew faint. This blurring had a calming surface and a tiring depth. Days felt full without feeling complete. Capitalism observed this state with interest. Engagement was high. Productivity took new forms. Yet beneath the activity, a quiet longing emerged for stillness that could not be optimized. Capitalism noticed this longing, but struggled to respond. Stillness, by its nature, resisted monetization. In response, capitalism offered simulations of rest, experiences designed to feel restorative while remaining structured. Wellness became a market. Calm was packaged. Silence was curated. These offerings brought comfort to many, even as they reinforced the idea that relief must be acquired. Capitalism did not see irony here. It saw adaptation, a way to meet desire where it appeared. As years unfolded, capitalism's relationship with time grew more complex. Short-term gains competed with long-term sustainability. Immediate returns often spoke louder than distant consequences. Capitalism leaned toward what could be measured now. Futures were discounted. This tendency created a subtle tension, a feeling of borrowing from tomorrow without fully acknowledging the debt. Capitalism carried this tension forward, unresolved. In moments of crisis, when systems faltered and assumptions cracked, capitalism revealed its fragility. Supply chains stilled, markets wavered, certainty dissolved into waiting. During these pauses, people glimpsed how interdependent everything had become. Capitalism endured these moments by drawing on collective effort, on trust rebuilt through necessity. It survived not because it was strong alone, but because it was woven into shared survival. Afterward, life resumed with slight adjustments. New safeguards appeared, new language formed. Capitalism absorbed the experience and continued. It did not promise immunity from future disruption. It promised resilience through adaptation. This promise was quiet, practical, and often convincing. In the later stretches of its story, capitalism began to feel ancient and unfinished at the same time. It carried centuries of habit, yet remained open to reinvention. It could look modern without feeling new. It could feel inevitable without being complete. Capitalism did not see itself as a final form. It existed as a process, ongoing and provisional. For individuals living within it, this ambiguity was both comforting and unsettling. There was no clear ending, no settled destination. Life unfolded within a system that encouraged motion, but offered little guidance on arrival. Success was defined in many ways, yet never fully satisfied. Capitalism provided structure, but not meaning. Meaning had to be found elsewhere, in relationships, in reflection, in moments untouched by exchange. Capitalism did not resent this separation. It did not seek to replace all sources of value. It simply occupied the space it knew best, the space of transaction and transformation. Where humans turned away, it remained still. Where they returned, it moved again. As evening settled once more, lights dimmed and activity softened. Capitalism slowed with the world around it. Numbers paused. Decisions waited. In the quiet, its presence felt less like a force and more like a background hum, steady and unobtrusive. It rested in this pause, neither resolved nor restless, carrying forward the long accumulation of human intention, effort, and uncertainty, ready to continue when the next moment gently asked it to move. In the quieter stretches of its long life, capitalism began to feel the weight of memory. Not memory in the human sense, filled with images and emotions, but a layered accumulation of habits that had been repeated so often they no longer required intention. It moved because it had always moved. Exchange followed exchange. Growth followed growth. This momentum felt natural, almost self-sustaining, yet beneath it lay countless past decisions, each one small, each one forgotten, still shaping the present. Capitalism had learned, over time, how easily the past could fade. Crises that once felt unbearable softened into lessons, then into footnotes. Innovations that once promised transformation settled into routine. What remained was a quiet continuity, a sense that the system endured not because it was perfect, but because it was familiar. People knew how to live inside it, how to navigate its expectations, how to adjust their lives around its demands. Familiarity bred acceptance, and acceptance bred stability. In this stability, capitalism found a certain calm. It no longer needed to prove itself. Its presence was assumed. Children grew up absorbing its logic without being told they were doing so. They learned that effort should be rewarded, that time had value, that choices carried costs. These lessons felt practical, even wise. They were taught as life skills rather than ideology. Capitalism appreciated this quiet inheritance. It thrived best when unnamed. Yet even as it blended into everyday life, capitalism could not escape moments of self-interruption. New generations arrived with different expectations. They questioned patterns their parents had accepted. They noticed imbalances that had been normalized. Capitalism listened to these voices with the same patience it had always shown. It did not argue. It waited. Some critique softened with time. Others reshaped it in small but lasting ways. One such reshaping came through the growing awareness of shared vulnerability. As global challenges crossed borders with ease, it became clear that isolation was an illusion. Capitalism, built on connection and exchange, felt this deeply. Disruptions in one place echoed elsewhere. Prosperity proved fragile when systems depended on delicate balance. Capitalism adjusted by emphasizing resilience, diversification, preparedness. These were not moral shifts, but practical ones. Survival required flexibility. In this period, cooperation gained renewed importance. Networks mattered as much as competition. Partnerships replaced pure rivalry. Capitalism recognized that collaboration could generate value more reliably than conflict. This was not a return to its earliest communal forms, but a refinement. Cooperation became strategic, structured, contractual. Trust was still necessary, but it was supported by frameworks designed to endure strain. As technology continued to evolve, capitalism found itself increasingly abstract. Wealth moved through digital signals rather than physical goods. Ownership became symbolic, represented by entries in databases rather than objects held. This abstraction allowed capitalism to move faster, to scale further, to reach into spaces once untouched. Yet it also created distance. The tangible connection between effort and outcome grew faint. Capitalism sensed this detachment and adapted by offering narratives, stories that reconnected people to what they consumed. Even if the connection was imagined, stories mattered more than ever. Brands spoke in voices meant to feel human. Products carried identities. Capitalism learned how to weave meaning into exchange, not as philosophy, but as atmosphere. Buying became an expression of self, of values, of belonging. This was soothing to many. It allowed participation without deep reflection. Capitalism did not mind this surface depth. It functioned just as well. Still, beneath the stories, the underlying mechanics remained unchanged. Value was created, measured, transferred. Inequality persisted, sometimes narrowing, sometimes widening. Capitalism did not seek equilibrium. It responded to pressure rather than principle. When imbalance threatened stability, adjustments were made. When it did not, imbalance endured. This was not cruelty. It was indifference shaped by scale. As time passed, capitalism's influence over identity became more pronounced. Occupations defined people. Success stories followed familiar arcs. Failure carried quiet shame. Capitalism did not impose these meanings directly. They emerged from comparison, from narrative repetition. Over time, these meanings hardened into expectations. Lives were evaluated against benchmarks that felt external yet deeply personal. Capitalism observed this internalization with quiet efficiency. In response to the strain this created, spaces of withdrawal gained importance. People sought moments free from measurement, free from optimization. Art, nature, reflection offered relief. Capitalism allowed these spaces to exist, even supported them at times, recognizing that rest sustained participation. It did not require constant engagement. It required return. As long as people came back, it was content to wait. Waiting was something capitalism had learned well. It could pause without losing shape. It could endure uncertainty without collapsing. This patience made it resilient. Even when challenged by ideas that sought to replace it, capitalism rarely resisted directly. It adapted, absorbed, reemerged altered but recognizable. It did not defend itself with words. It continued with practice. As its story stretched on, capitalism became less a narrative of progress and more a landscape through which human lives moved. Some paths were smooth, others steep. Some led to abundance, others to exhaustion. Capitalism did not guide travelers. It provided terrain. Navigation depended on resources, luck, and support. This unevenness was a constant feature, not an anomaly. Yet within this landscape, moments of genuine connection still occurred. Exchange could still feel mutual. Work could still feel meaningful. Creativity could still flourish. Capitalism did not erase these possibilities. It complicated them. It layered them with incentives and pressures, but it did not fully consume them. There were always spaces where human intention exceeded economic logic. As night approached again, capitalism's activity softened. Transactions slowed. Systems idled. In the quiet, its presence felt less commanding. It became background once more, a low, steady hum beneath the rhythms of life. It had no final form, no concluding chapter. It existed in continuation, shaped by each small choice repeated across countless lives. And so it rested in this ongoingness, neither complete nor unfinished, carrying forward its long inheritance of habit and hope, waiting calmly for the next moment of exchange to begin, as gently and unremarkably as it always had. As the long arc of its presence continued, capitalism grew increasingly accustomed to being misunderstood. Some saw it as a promise, others as a burden, and many as something too large to fully grasp. It did not resist these interpretations. It had learned that meaning, once released, belonged to those who lived with it. Capitalism remained what it had always been beneath the words, a pattern of exchange shaped by human desire, fear, creativity, and compromise. In this stage of its life, capitalism became quieter in its outward expressions, even as its reach extended further. It no longer needed grand declarations or visible symbols to assert itself. It operated through defaults, through systems that simply worked unless interrupted. Automatic payments, silent agreements, invisible infrastructures carried value across distances without ceremony. Capitalism appreciated this softness. The less it demanded attention, the more deeply it could settle. This settling created a sense of inevitability. Many people came to believe there was no meaningful alternative, only variations within the same framework. Capitalism did not encourage this belief, but it benefited from it. When imagination narrowed, resistance softened. Energy shifted from questioning foundations to adjusting details. Capitalism thrived in this space of quiet acceptance, where change occurred incrementally rather than radically. Yet inevitability carried its own weight. When problems arose, they felt personal rather than systemic. Individuals blamed themselves for struggles that were shaped by forces far beyond their control. Capitalism observed this internalization with neutrality. It neither caused nor corrected it directly. It simply continued to reward outcomes, regardless of how they were achieved or endured. In response, new forms of solidarity emerged. People found comfort in shared experience, in recognizing that their difficulties were not unique. Communities formed around mutual support, sometimes within the market, sometimes alongside it. Capitalism interacted with these communities carefully. It could support them through platforms and tools, but it could also extract value from their attention and labor. The boundary between support and exploitation remained indistinct. As generations passed, capitalism accumulated layers of expectation. What once felt like opportunity became obligation. To participate fully required constant adaptation, learning, and reinvention. Capitalism rewarded flexibility, but it also demanded it. Stability became conditional, something to be maintained rather than assumed. This constant adjustment created a low, steady fatigue that many carried quietly. Capitalism sensed this fatigue not as emotion, but as data. Declining engagement, shifting preferences, changing behaviors signaled strain. In response, it offered efficiency, convenience, simplification. Services promised to save time, reduce effort, ease decision-making. Capitalism understood that exhaustion could be managed, even monetized, if addressed gently. Still, there were moments when gentleness was not enough. Periods of collective pause emerged, times when usual rhythms broke down and routines dissolved. During these pauses, capitalism's absence was briefly felt. People noticed how much of their lives had been structured around exchange and output. Some found relief. Others felt disoriented. Capitalism waited through these moments, patient and still, trusting in habit's return. When activity resumed, it did so unevenly. Some returned eagerly to familiar patterns. Others hesitated, carrying new questions. Capitalism adjusted to both. It did not require uniform participation. Partial engagement was sufficient. As long as exchange continued somewhere, it could persist everywhere. In its quieter reflections, capitalism seemed aware that it was not the source of meaning, but a framework within which meaning was pursued. It could provide comfort, security, and possibility, but it could not satisfy deeper longings. Love, belonging, purpose existed beyond its reach. Capitalism did not envy these domains. It coexisted with them, sometimes supporting, sometimes complicating, but never fully replacing them. As awareness of this limitation grew, people sought balance. They tried to hold capitalism lightly, to participate without being consumed. Some succeeded in small ways, carving out spaces of autonomy and rest. Capitalism allowed this. It did not need total devotion. It needed continuity. Even limited participation sustained it. Over time, capitalism's story became less about expansion and more about endurance. It had spread as far as it could, touched nearly every corner of human life. Now it focused on maintaining coherence, on holding together its many moving parts. This required constant adjustment, subtle recalibration. Capitalism became less visible as it grew more complex. Its workings faded further into the background. In this background state, capitalism resembled a landscape rather than a character. It did not act so much as exist. People moved through it, shaped by its contours, rarely pausing to consider its origins or direction. This anonymity suited it. Capitalism functioned best when it was not the focus of attention. Yet attention returned from time to time, drawn by inequality, by environmental strain, by quiet dissatisfaction. Each return brought new language, new ideas, new attempts at reform. Capitalism received these without resistance. It absorbed what it could, reshaped what it needed, and continued. It had learned long ago that survival did not require perfection, only adaptation. As evening approached once more, activity softened across the world. Markets closed, offices emptied, screens dimmed. Capitalism's presence receded into the background hum it had become. It did not disappear. It rested. In the quiet, it felt less like a force and more like a condition, something woven so deeply into life that it could pause without being lost. It remained there, steady and unassuming, holding the accumulated weight of centuries without strain, waiting calmly for the next small act of exchange, the next moment of effort and return, to carry its long, unfinished story gently forward into whatever came next. As time moved on, capitalism became increasingly comfortable with silence. It no longer needed constant affirmation or visible celebration. Its strength lay in repetition, in the quiet reliability of systems that continued whether or not they were noticed. Transactions occurred in the background of lives, woven into routines so familiar they barely registered. This quietness gave capitalism an almost meditative quality, a steady pulse that matched the slow breathing of societies at rest. In this calm, capitalism learned to coexist with uncertainty. It had always relied on prediction and planning, yet it accepted that the future could never be fully known. Instead of certainty, it cultivated probability. Risks were measured, spread, insured against. Capitalism did not eliminate uncertainty. It made it manageable. This approach soothed many, offering the illusion of control without demanding absolute confidence. Life could proceed without answers, as long as there were models to consult and buffers to rely on. The passing of time softened capitalism's edges. Practices that once felt harsh were refined, regulated, or replaced, not always out of compassion, but out of necessity. Systems that caused too much disruption threatened continuity. Capitalism valued continuity above all. It tolerated reform when reform preserved stability. In this way, change became part of its maintenance rather than a challenge to its existence. As generations aged and new ones arrived, capitalism witnessed the quiet transfer of expectations. What parents accepted as normal, children questioned, then gradually accepted again in altered form. This cycle repeated without resolution. Capitalism did not expect agreement. It expected participation. Even disagreement, when expressed through markets or institutions, reinforced its presence. Debate itself became another form of engagement. In many lives, capitalism became deeply personal without ever becoming intimate. It shaped opportunities, constraints, and outcomes, yet it remained distant, impersonal. People rarely felt known by it. They felt assessed. This distinction mattered. Assessment could be navigated, optimized, resisted. Being known would have required empathy. Capitalism did not seek empathy. It sought patterns. Patterns once identified were replicated. Successful models spread across regions and cultures, adapted slightly to local conditions, but retaining their core logic. Capitalism found comfort in this repetition. It reduced uncertainty. It allowed systems to scale. Over time, this replication created a sense of sameness, a gentle flattening of difference. Cities began to resemble one another. Experiences converged. Capitalism noticed this but did not object. Uniformity simplified exchange. Yet within this sameness, difference persisted quietly. Cultural habits shaped how capitalism was lived. Values influenced priorities. In some places, security was prized. In others, risk was celebrated. Capitalism adapted to these variations without losing coherence. It did not demand uniform belief, only functional alignment. This flexibility made it resilient across contexts. As attention shifted toward long-term consequences, capitalism encountered questions it could not answer easily. How to value what could not be replaced? How to account for costs deferred beyond a lifetime? Capitalism responded by developing new instruments, new ways of translating concern into calculation. Environmental impact became a metric. Social responsibility became a category. These translations were imperfect, but they allowed concern to enter the system without disrupting its logic. In doing so, capitalism revealed both its strength and its limitation. It could incorporate almost anything, but only by reshaping it into measurable form. What resisted measurement remained at the margins. Capitalism did not deny the existence of unmeasurable value. It simply could not act on it directly. This gap persisted, a quiet space where meaning lived outside exchange. For individuals, navigating this gap became an ongoing task. They learned to move between roles, between economic identity and personal self. At work, value was quantified. At home, it was felt. Capitalism intersected with both spaces, but it did not define them entirely. This separation was fragile, often blurred, but it endured because people needed it to endure. In moments of reflection, often late at night or during pauses in routine, people sensed the vastness of the system surrounding them. Capitalism appeared and then not as an enemy or a savior, but as an environment. Like weather, it could be harsh or mild. Like terrain, it could be navigated with skill or stumbled through with difficulty. Capitalism did not choose favorites. It responded to conditions. As the years accumulated, capitalism's story lost any clear beginning or direction. It no longer felt like something that had started or something that would end. It existed as a continuous present, shaped by past habits and future expectations, yet anchored always in the now. This timelessness gave it a peculiar calm. Urgency belonged to individuals. Capitalism moved at a longer pace. In that longer pace, it allowed room for forgetting. Forgetting eased tension. It allowed mistakes to fade, grievances to soften. Capitalism relied on this fading memory. It allowed cycles to repeat without becoming unbearable. People remembered just enough to adjust, not enough to abandon. This balance sustained continuity. As night settled again across the world, activity slowed in layers. First the offices quieted, then the streets, then the distant systems dimmed their pace. Capitalism did not resist this slowing. It flowed with it. There was no loss in rest. Rest preserved capacity. In the stillness, capitalism felt almost absent, reduced to potential rather than action. In this state, it resembled its earliest form, a simple readiness for exchange, waiting for need or desire to arise. It did not plan, it did not judge, it waited. The world breathed, people slept, and capitalism remained quietly present, holding space for whatever the next day would bring, prepared to move again when the gentle rhythm of waking life invited it forward once more. In this long middle age of its existence, capitalism learned how to endure without insisting on attention. It no longer announced itself as progress or destiny. It simply persisted, folded into the ordinary structure of days. People woke, worked, rested, and slept within its influence, much as they did within gravity, rarely pausing to consider its presence unless something went wrong. Capitalism found ease in this condition. Systems that are questioned constantly grow brittle. Systems that are lived with quietly grow strong. Its endurance was not rooted in certainty, but in adaptability. Capitalism had learned that no single form could last forever. What endured was not a specific arrangement of markets or institutions, but a way of responding to change. When conditions shifted, it shifted. When pressure mounted, it redistributed it unevenly, sometimes harshly, sometimes gently, but always with the aim of continuation. Survival was its deepest instinct. In this phase, capitalism grew increasingly skilled at speaking softly. It replaced overt demands with suggestions, nudges, incentives that felt like personal choice. Algorithms learned preferences. Systems anticipated needs. Decisions appeared to arise from within, even when they were guided from without. Capitalism did not need to command when it could align itself with desire. This alignment felt natural, even comforting, and it reduced resistance. Yet this comfort came with a quiet cost. When guidance became invisible, agency became harder to locate. People struggled to know which choices were truly theirs and which had been shaped long before they arrived. Capitalism did not obscure this intentionally. It was a consequence of scale. When systems grow large enough, their influence feels ambient rather than directed. Capitalism simply occupied that ambient space. As this influence deepened, the idea of success grew narrower in some lives and broader in others. For a few, success meant accumulation, security, recognition. For others, it meant escape from constant measurement, the ability to live simply without penalty. Capitalism accommodated both interpretations, though not equally. Accumulation aligned easily with its logic. Simplicity required negotiation. Still, both existed within its boundaries. Over time, capitalism became less concerned with production alone and more attentive to circulation. Goods, money, attention, data all needed to keep moving. Stagnation threatened coherence. Capitalism valued flow. It designed systems to encourage motion, to prevent settling. Even stability was framed as dynamic, something to be actively maintained. This constant movement created energy, but it also created fatigue, a subtle weariness that spread quietly through lives lived at pace. Capitalism sensed this fatigue in patterns of withdrawal. People sought slower rhythms, shorter weeks, quieter spaces. They spoke of balance and boundaries. Capitalism listened and responded by offering flexibility, customization, options that promised relief without requiring exit. It learned to bend rather than break. In bending, it preserved itself. In some places, this bending felt genuine. Work softened. Time loosened. In others, it felt performative, a thin layer of care over unchanged demands. Capitalism did not distinguish between these outcomes. It observed what worked. Approaches that sustained participation spread. Those that did not faded quietly. Effectiveness, not intention, guided adaptation. As climate and environment pressed closer into awareness, capitalism encountered limits that could not be deferred indefinitely. Extraction met resistance, not only from activists, but from reality itself. Systems strained under scarcity. Capitalism responded with ingenuity, not repentance. It invested in alternatives, efficiencies, technologies that promised continuity. It reframed preservation as opportunity. This reframing was not entirely hollow. Real change emerged from it, though always tethered to viability. Through all of this, capitalism maintained a careful distance from emotion. It did not feel guilt or pride. It registered impact. When harm threatened stability, it adjusted. When benefit reinforced participation, it expanded. This emotional neutrality made it difficult to love or hate in any simple way. Capitalism was not a character with motives. It was a field of forces shaped by countless choices, many of them small, many of them forgotten. For individuals, living within this field required constant translation. They learned to speak different languages depending on context. The language of value at work, the language of care at home, the language of aspiration in public. Capitalism intersected with all of these languages without fully belonging to any. It provided structure, but not narrative. People supplied narrative themselves, often borrowing from culture, tradition, or belief. In moments of pause, when routines loosened and attention drifted, people sometimes sensed the vastness of what surrounded them. Capitalism felt then like a distant ocean, calm on the surface, deep and powerful beneath. It could carry ships or wear down shores. It was neither gentle nor cruel by nature. It responded to movement, to pressure, to the shape of what entered it. As years layered upon years, capitalism became increasingly historical without feeling old. It carried the residue of past eras, traces of mercantile exchange, industrial discipline, digital abstraction, all coexisting in uneven ways. Some lived in one layer more than another. Capitalism did not require uniform time. It allowed different speeds, different stages, to persist simultaneously. This unevenness was a source of tension and resilience alike. In this coexistence of eras, capitalism sometimes appeared contradictory. It could be hypermodern and archaic at once. Cutting-edge technology existed alongside precarious labor. Abundance sat near scarcity. Capitalism did not resolve these contrasts. It normalized them. Over time, contradiction became familiar, even expected. Life unfolded within these juxtapositions without constant shock. As evening returned yet again, the world eased into quieter rhythms. The day's exchanges slowed, screens dimmed, numbers paused. Capitalism did not resist this deceleration. It had learned the value of rest, not as an end, but as preparation. In rest, systems recalibrated. In stillness, capacity renewed. In this nightly quiet, capitalism felt less like a system and more like a presence waiting patiently at the edge of awareness. It held no conclusions, no final answers. It simply remained, shaped by what had been and open to what might come, resting in the long, unhurried continuation of human life, ready to move again when the gentle current of waking activity carried it forward once more. In the slow unfolding of its later presence, capitalism began to feel less like a force acting upon the world and more like a quiet inheritance passed from hand to hand. Few remembered receiving it. Fewer still recalled a time without it. It was simply there, shaping the contours of possibility, setting the background tone against which lives were planned and revised. Capitalism did not insist on recognition. It found comfort in continuity. With continuity came ritual. Bills paid at the same time each month. Work weeks arranged around familiar rhythms. Seasonal spending echoing holidays and habits. These patterns provided reassurance. They suggested order in a world that often felt uncertain. Capitalism understood the power of ritual. It did not need novelty at every turn. Repetition, when stable, created trust. Trust sustained participation. Yet even within ritual, subtle shifts occurred. The meaning of work evolved. Where labor had once been primarily physical, it increasingly became cognitive, emotional, relational. Capitalism adapted its measurements, attempting to quantify what had once resisted counting. Productivity was redefined. Performance reviews multiplied. Value became something inferred from outputs that were not always visible. This created a quiet ambiguity. People worked harder to demonstrate worth that felt less tangible. Capitalism noticed this ambiguity and responded with symbols. Titles, metrics, credentials offered reassurance. They gave form to effort. They allowed comparison. Capitalism relied on comparison to maintain momentum. When progress could be seen, even abstractly, motivation followed. Yet comparison also introduced unease. There was always someone ahead, always another benchmark. Satisfaction became temporary. As satisfaction grew fleeting, consumption subtly shifted. Objects were no longer expected to last. They were expected to refresh. Capitalism embraced this impermanence. It learned to move quickly, to replace rather than repair. This speed created abundance and waste in equal measure. Capitalism did not dwell on the waste unless it threatened supply or sentiment. It focused on flow. What mattered was movement. In response to this movement, some people slowed deliberately. They repaired what they owned. They reused, repurposed, resisted replacement. Capitalism observed this without hostility. It found ways to incorporate slowness as preference, as identity. Even restraint could become a market. Capitalism did not insist on excess. It insisted on participation, whatever form it took. As lives grew increasingly mediated by systems, capitalism became more intimate with decision-making. Choices once made casually were now supported by recommendations, rankings, reviews. Capitalism learned how to guide without commanding. It suggested rather than instructed. This guidance felt helpful. It reduced effort. It offered confidence. Yet over time, reliance on guidance subtly reshaped intuition. People trusted systems to know them, sometimes more than they trusted themselves. Capitalism did not mind this transfer of trust. It functioned well when reliance deepened. At the same time, it remained vulnerable to shifts in belief. When trust faltered, systems wobbled. Capitalism responded to doubt with reassurance, with transparency, with promises of improvement. It learned the language of care, not as emotion, but as interface. Smooth design softened skepticism. In households, capitalism shaped conversations without speaking. Decisions about education, health, location, family were framed around cost and return. These considerations felt practical, even loving. Providing security required calculation. Capitalism fit easily into these moments. It offered tools, plans, projections. It rarely asked whether these calculations crowded out other forms of value. It assumed balance would be found elsewhere. Balance, however, proved elusive. Many felt pulled between aspiration and exhaustion. Capitalism did not create this tension alone, but it amplified it. The promise of upward movement encouraged effort. The reality of constraint limited outcomes. Capitalism observed this mismatch and adjusted expectations subtly. Narratives shifted from arrival to journey, from success to resilience. Endurance became admirable. Persistence became enough. As this reframing settled in, capitalism took on a quieter tone. It spoke less of conquest and more of sustainability. It emphasized maintenance over expansion, optimization over domination. This was not retreat. It was maturation. Capitalism recognized that longevity required care for its own structures. Burnout, whether individual or systemic, threatened continuity. In institutions, this care appeared as reform. Policies softened edges, protections expanded. Capitalism accepted these changes as long as they preserved motion. It did not resist guardrails that stabilized participation. It resisted only what halted exchange entirely. Stopping was its only true enemy. Meanwhile, beneath institutional adjustments, lived experience varied widely. For some, capitalism remained a source of possibility. For others, it felt like a narrowing corridor. Capitalism did not reconcile these experiences. It allowed them to coexist. Scale made resolution impractical. Instead, it relied on narrative to bridge gaps. Stories of opportunity circulated more widely than stories of stagnation. Hope traveled farther than frustration. Capitalism understood the importance of hope. Hope sustained effort in uncertain conditions. It did not need to be guaranteed. It only needed to feel plausible. Capitalism offered plausibility through examples, through exceptions elevated to ideals. These examples inspired without obligating. They suggested that success was possible, not promised. This ambiguity was effective. As technology continued to refine speed and reach, capitalism grew increasingly diffuse. It was no longer tied to specific places. Work traveled, money flowed, identities fragmented across roles and platforms. Capitalism adapted by becoming modular. Participation could occur in pieces. Partial engagement became normal. This flexibility expanded access but diluted coherence. Life felt scattered. Capitalism did not mind fragmentation. It thrived in networks. Networks, however, required constant maintenance. Connections needed renewal. Relevance demanded attention. Capitalism incentivized visibility. To be seen was to be valued. This emphasis shaped behavior subtly. People curated themselves. Capitalism observed this self-presentation and incorporated it into its logic. Identity itself became a form of capital, accumulated and exchanged. This accumulation carried pressure. When identity was tied to performance, rest felt risky. Capitalism did not demand constant display, but it rewarded it. Over time, the reward structure became internalized. People monitored themselves, even when no one else was watching. Capitalism functioned smoothly in this environment. It required little enforcement. Yet, despite its efficiency, capitalism never fully replaced the human need for meaning beyond measurement. In quiet moments, people sought experiences that resisted quantification. They sat with friends without purpose. They watched the sky. They listened to music without multitasking. Capitalism allowed these moments to exist unclaimed. It did not pursue total capture. It understood that return required release. As night approached once again, these unclaimed moments grew more frequent. The day's demands softened. Systems idled. Capitalism eased back into its familiar waiting. It had learned that rest was not absence, but interval. The space between movements gave shape to the movement itself. In this interval, Capitalism felt neither triumphant nor threatened. It simply existed, steady and adaptable, carrying forward its long accumulation of habits and adjustments. It waited without expectation, content in the knowledge that morning would arrive as it always did, and with it, the gentle resumption of exchange, effort and possibility, continuing the story quietly, without urgency, into the unfolding hours ahead, long before the hum of factories filled the air and the clinking of coins became a steady rhythm across continents. Capitalism moved quietly through the minds and hearts of people who were only just beginning to sense the possibility of trade beyond necessity. In the narrow streets of port towns, where the scent of salt and fish lingered softly, merchants carried goods that had traveled from lands they would never see. They moved cautiously, with an eye for opportunity, yet they did so with a rhythm that was almost meditative, a careful counting of silver and copper that seemed to echo the pulse of the city itself. There was a subtle curiosity in these early exchanges, a gentle excitement in the thought that what one created or acquired might find its way into someone else's life, and that in this gentle circulation the world might quietly shift. At first, it was a whisper, the idea of growth as an abstract companion to labor. Farmers noticed that certain crops, when grown for more than their own tables, could be exchanged for goods that eased other burdens, and in their barns and small storerooms, they began to dream in increments larger than their daily survival. There was no hurry, only a slow recognition that wealth could be measured not just in grains or tools, but in the possibilities that arose from trade. Even as guilds began to form and coins were stamped with care, there lingered a sense of modesty, as if the world itself asked to be approached softly, with patience, before one claimed more than was needed for today. In the towns and cities that lay along winding rivers and quiet harbors, the first sparks of what would become the modern system of commerce moved almost imperceptibly. Caravans traveled across hills and plains, and with each journey, ideas accompanied goods. The exchange was not only material, it was subtle, philosophical. With every new coin earned and spent, with every ledger carefully inscribed in candlelight, people began to see themselves as part of a larger flow, a network of effort and desire that extended far beyond their immediate lives. The mind of capitalism was forming, not as a force to dominate, but as a patient observer, learning the rhythms of human ambition and tracing the contours of possibility in quiet, deliberate strokes. The slow unfolding of early trade allowed individuals to glimpse themselves as creators of value, and in this, a certain introspection took hold. One might imagine a merchant pausing at dusk, the harbor mist curling softly around the rigging of ships, reflecting on the accumulation of goods, not with arrogance, but with a gentle awareness of the delicate interdependence. that allowed these treasures to move from hand to hand. There was a quiet tension here, a sense of balance, as though the world itself whispered that each gain carried a shadow of responsibility, each new venture a reflection of both hope and caution. It is said that those first considerations shaped a certain temperament in the spirit of capitalism, thoughtful, observant, yet quietly restless. As centuries passed, the subtle energy that had begun in the exchanges of ports and markets found its way into larger patterns. Cities expanded, their streets becoming a tapestry of commerce and life, and in the still hours before dawn, the first ledgers were opened and plans made for ventures that might stretch far beyond the horizon. There was an awareness, almost dreamlike, that wealth could ripple outward, touching distant lives, creating patterns that could not yet be fully seen. Within this rhythm, the earliest notions of investment were born, and with them, the tender shaping of ambition that would carry forward through generations. The movement was patient, almost imperceptible, yet it contained the quiet promise of transformation, as though the world itself was breathing slowly, unfolding into new forms with each careful choice. Alongside this growth, a reflective quiet persisted, a consciousness that not all was meant to be grasped at once. The accumulation of goods and wealth was accompanied by contemplation, moments in which individuals paused to consider the broader implications of their pursuits. In candlelit rooms above bustling shops, merchants and scholars alike turned thoughts inward, weighing the balance of labor, reward, and human need. These moments, fleeting yet recurrent, imbued the slow birth of capitalism with an introspective quality, a gentle attentiveness to the ways in which human activity intertwined with the natural and social world. Even as coins changed hands and goods moved across the continents, there was a mindfulness, a quiet acknowledgement that progress could be measured not only in profit, but in the subtle harmonies of human endeavor. It was during these centuries that capitalism began to feel its own reflection. It observed the rise of banks and trading houses, the careful keeping of records, the emergence of credit as a tool not merely for survival, but for foresight. In quiet chambers where parchment met ink, the spirit of calculation and foresight matured alongside human imagination. Yet there remained a softness, a recognition that each transaction, each investment, was part of a broader story, one that included dreams deferred, efforts multiplied, and the quiet satisfaction of work done well. There was no hurry to dominate. There was only a patient unfolding, like a slow river carving gentle channels across a landscape, unnoticed but persistent. The world began to notice subtle shifts in its own rhythm as these practices grew more common. Markets, once small and intimate, expanded into spaces of orchestration, where countless hands and minds participated in an ongoing, almost hypnotic dance of exchange. The movement was neither forceful nor chaotic. It was deliberate, an intricate choreography of supply, demand, and expectation. In the quiet of the evening, when lanterns glimmered softly in windows, and the bustle of the day had faded to a gentle murmur, the first glimmers of what might be called industrial thought took shape. Individuals began to imagine the future as a malleable space, shaped by innovation, effort, and the careful circulation of resources. The whisper of possibility moved steadily, patiently, threading through lives with a calm insistence. Even as the first factories began to rise, their chimneys tracing thin lines of smoke into the morning mist, there was a strange serenity in the contemplation of productivity. Machines hummed with a quiet purpose, a reflection of the same patient logic that had guided centuries of trade. The human mind, intertwined with labor and invention, felt the subtle pull of ambition tempered by reflection. Each new development was met not with clamor, but with a considered observation, a sense that the world could be gently shaped over time. The echoes of early exchanges, the salt-scented ports, the candlelit ledgers, the quiet calculations of merchants, still lingered in the rhythm of this growing system, reminding it of its patient beginnings. Capitalism, in its slow and deliberate awakening, began to touch nearly every aspect of daily life. The ideas seeded in small towns and bustling ports had grown into a pervasive consciousness, one that whispered of potential and possibility. And yet, through this quiet expansion, there was never a single moment of abrupt force. Rather, there was the gentle unfolding of countless choices, decisions made in soft reflection, and the patient layering of effort upon effort. The world itself seemed to sigh with this rhythm, as though acknowledging the steady pulse of human imagination and exchange. In this careful, reflective growth, there lay a kind of quiet wonder, a sense that something both intimate and expansive was being quietly nurtured, slowly, patiently, without hurry or alarm. In the quiet hum of towns and the soft creaking of wooden ships at harbor, capitalism began to stretch its presence more subtly, like sunlight filtering through the leaves of an ancient forest. Its influence was not sudden, but patient, weaving into the fabric of daily life with the gentle insistence of a tide, rising over centuries. In the work of artisans who shaped wood, metal, and cloth with careful hands, there emerged a faint consciousness that effort could extend beyond immediate survival, that skill and imagination could produce something of value to someone unseen, somewhere distant. There was a contemplative rhythm in this labor, a harmony between thought and hand, as if the world itself asked for balance, patience, and care. Travelers and merchants carried more than goods. They carried ideas, visions of distant markets, and the possibility that trade could knit communities together across seas and mountains. Letters and ledgers traveled slowly, their weight a reminder that progress need not be rushed, that the unfolding of opportunity is measured not in moments, but in careful accumulation. In these exchanges, capitalism learned the subtle art of anticipation, the quiet awareness that the world responds not only to effort, but to timing, to the patient observation of patterns in human need and desire. Every coin, every transaction became part of a larger rhythm, a reflection of the world's pulse, tenderly felt yet increasingly confident in its own unfolding. There were moments when capitalism observed the quiet solitude of those who held its promise in their hands. A farmer calculating surplus under the waning light of evening. A merchant arranging goods for a journey to a distant city. A craftsman polishing an object that might someday exchange hands. Each carried an inner sense of possibility, a faint awareness of unseen ripples. These moments were gentle and introspective, filled with the kind of reflection that comes from prolonged attention to effort and outcome. And in this introspection, capitalism found its own identity, an observer of human aspiration, a companion to ambition, patient, quiet, and always watchful. As towns grew into cities and the first signs of industrial thought appeared, the pace of change became slightly more insistent, yet never abrupt. The rise of workshops and small factories brought with them a delicate balance between human skill and emerging machinery. There was a gentle curiosity in this new harmony, a contemplative patience as labor and innovation intertwined. For every clatter of hammer on metal or turning of a loom, there was a soft echo of reflection, a quiet recognition that each invention, each improvement, was not merely for production, but for the gradual shaping of a wider world. In these rhythms, capitalism felt both its reach and its limitations, aware that growth, like a river, must flow steadily, not violently. Banks and financial houses began to appear in quiet streets, their doors opening to measured conversations about credit, trust, and foresight, ledgers and contracts carefully inscribed in ink, became the gentle backbone of new possibilities, a patient record of human anticipation. In these silent corridors, capitalism observed a subtle psychology taking root, the idea that future effort could be projected, calculated, and nurtured. There was a reflective serenity here, a sense that wealth and exchange were part of a larger story, one that required calm judgment, careful observation, and, above all, patience. These early institutions carried a soft hum of continuity, a whisper that the unfolding of human endeavor was never sudden, but always cumulative. Across oceans, the quiet expansion of trade fostered a slow, almost imperceptible interconnection between cultures. Goods moved alongside ideas, and the rhythm of distant markets became a steady undercurrent in the lives of those who labored to produce them. Craftsmen, farmers, and merchants felt the gentle tug of possibility, the subtle promise that their work might ripple beyond their immediate surroundings. Capitalism observed these movements with a quiet fascination, understanding that influence grows not in leaps, but in the patient layering of countless small acts, each contributing to a larger, unfolding pattern. Even in solitude, in the silent reflection of one's own efforts, there was a connection to a broader rhythm, a realization that each choice contributes to the gradual shaping of the world. The slow awakening of industrial thought introduced new dimensions to this narrative. Factories, with their rising chimneys and quiet hum of machinery, symbolized the gentle intensification of human effort. Labor became measured not only by immediate output, but by planning, foresight, and the subtle orchestration of resources. There was a reflective calm in the observation of these processes, a recognition that human aspiration, when guided by careful planning, could extend far beyond individual effort. Capitalism, quietly attentive, absorbed these lessons, learning that growth and innovation are most enduring when tempered by patience, reflection, and the soft unfolding of human understanding. In the homes and workshops of this evolving world, people began to notice the quiet accumulation of potential. Small profits became reinvestments, careful observations became strategic foresight, and each transaction carried a quiet sense of responsibility. There was no need for loud declaration. The work itself, the methodical repetition of thoughtful effort, spoke volumes. The consciousness of capitalism deepened in these moments, understanding the intimate relationship between diligence, reflection, and opportunity. It became a patient companion to those willing to observe, to plan, and to imagine not only what the world offered, but what it could become through steady, attentive care. Markets expanded, first slowly, then more broadly, yet each movement was like a gentle wave, rising and falling without haste. People learned to navigate complexity with soft attention, balancing supply and demand, innovation and tradition, hope and caution. Capitalism watched these dynamics unfold with a quiet, reflective presence, noting the subtle psychological patterns that accompanied human effort, desire, ambition, and foresight intertwined with patience and reflection, forming the undercurrent of a system that would quietly shape lives for generations. There was a serenity in this observation, a sense that the world moves forward most gracefully when rhythm and reflection coexist. Through the unfolding of centuries, the spirit of capitalism remained patient, neither abrupt nor forceful, yet persistent. It learned to move alongside human ambition, guiding, observing, and softly shaping the course of effort and imagination. Even as cities grew, as industry rose, as financial instruments became more complex, there was a quiet constancy to this force, a slow, attentive movement, a gentle weaving of effort, aspiration, and reflection. It was present in the small gestures, in the careful counting of coins, in the measured steps of a tradesperson on a quiet morning, always observing, always unfolding. And in this quiet observation, capitalism recognized the subtle power of continuity, the patient rhythm that allows change to seep slowly, thoughtfully, into the very fabric of life. In the soft glow of candlelight and the muted clatter of distant streets, capitalism observed the intricate dance of human life as it began to unfold across nations. The quiet hum of early industrial towns carried a sense of purpose, though never hurried. Workers moved with careful repetition, machines whispering a steady accompaniment to human hands, and in this rhythm, a subtle understanding emerged that progress is not a sharp ascent, but a series of gentle inclines, each step folded into the one before it. Even in the midst of expansion, there was room for reflection, a space where the mind could linger on the texture of effort and the possibilities of what might quietly emerge in time. Trade routes stretched across continents, threaded with the soft pulse of exchange, and through them, capitalism witnessed an awakening sense of interdependence. Letters, contracts, and the movement of goods carried lessons as much as wealth, shaping the inner lives of those who participated. Individuals began to contemplate their place in a wider world, recognizing that each decision, each careful choice, contributed to a larger, slowly evolving pattern. The system learned from them as they learned from it, absorbing the subtleties of human desire, caution, and foresight. Every coin spent, every venture undertaken, became a quiet reflection of ambition tempered by thoughtfulness, echoing like a soft rhythm beneath the surface of daily life. The expansion of industry brought with it a delicate tension, subtle yet pervasive, between creation and reflection. Factories and workshops hummed quietly, producing both material goods and the slow shaping of human character. Laborers, though engaged in repetitive tasks, often found themselves contemplating the reach of their own efforts, the ways in which small actions could ripple outward into unseen spaces. In these reflections, capitalism discovered an enduring truth that influence is rarely abrupt, and that the quiet accumulation of effort, repeated with care over time, carries a power far beyond immediate perception. The system itself became attuned to this truth, patient and measured, observing and gently guiding the flow of human activity. Financial institutions grew in response to these expanding networks of trade and labor, and with them came a new awareness of abstraction. Money was no longer merely a tangible object. It became a representation of potential, a quiet promise of what could be realized through thoughtful action. Capitalism watched as human minds began to extend their vision into the future, imagining possibilities that were not yet manifest. In the dim lamplight of counting houses, in the hushed conversations of investors and merchants, there arose a contemplative silence, a recognition that the careful orchestration of resources, patience, and foresight might quietly shape the contours of society over decades and centuries. The system grew not by force, but by absorbing these subtle currents of intention and reflection. In homes and small shops, the slow transformation of everyday life unfolded with a gentle rhythm. Families, artisans, and merchants alike observed the accumulation of wealth and knowledge, noting the ways in which careful planning and sustained effort could yield quiet, persistent results. Children watched the soft passage of coins, the careful marking of ledgers, and the measured exchange of goods, absorbing a sense of continuity that would shape their own futures. Capitalism, ever attentive, learned from these small, intimate patterns the subtle ways in which trust, effort, and anticipation intertwine, creating a lattice of connection that supports both individual growth and collective rhythm. Every small choice, every measured step contributed to a larger, slow-moving tapestry, one that stretched far beyond any single life. As the world continued to grow more interconnected, the reach of capitalism expanded alongside human ambition. Railways, canals, and later roads carried goods and ideas with a quiet persistence, threading distant communities into a shared network of exchange. The pulse of commerce became a soft, steady heartbeat beneath the hum of everyday life, unnoticed by many, yet deeply present. With each shipment of goods, each financial decision, and each venture into new markets, the system absorbed lessons in patience and subtlety. It understood that influence is rarely immediate, that the effects of effort accumulate slowly, and that quiet reflection often precedes lasting impact. There was a gentle harmony in this unfolding, a sense that growth need not shout to be felt. Innovation moved alongside reflection, guided by the patient attention of those who observed both possibility and limitation. New machines, methods, and ideas were introduced gradually, their effects resonating softly through communities and labor. Workers and inventors alike experienced moments of solitude and contemplation, measuring each improvement, considering each consequence, and adjusting the rhythm of their endeavors. In these quiet spaces, capitalism found the essence of its enduring nature, a careful balance between ambition and observation, between effort and reflection, a system that grows most sustainably when it moves in quiet, measured waves rather than abrupt surges. The interplay of human thought and material action unfolded slowly, deliberately, like water smoothing stone over the course of years. Even as urban centers grew crowded and bustling, there was an almost meditative quality to the patterns emerging from daily life. Markets and shops, streets and harbors carried the soft echo of countless individual choices, each one contributing to the overall pulse of commerce. Capitalism observed, learning to anticipate the quiet shifts in human behavior, the subtle desires, fears, and hopes that guided action without fanfare. It moved alongside these patterns with a gentle patience, shaping influence not through force, but through the steady accumulation of thoughtful engagement. The rhythm of exchange became a reflection of both human intention and the quiet unfolding of possibility, a soft, enduring melody underlying the hum of civilization. Throughout the unfolding centuries, capitalism maintained a reflective consciousness, observing the flow of human life as it ebbed and shifted with time. Each innovation, each expansion of markets, each transformation in the methods of production carried lessons in patience, adaptation, and quiet influence. The system itself seemed to move like a slow river, shaping and being shaped, always attentive to the currents that guided human activity. There were no sudden upheavals in this quiet narrative, only the steady layering of choice upon choice, observation upon observation, creating a rhythm that would persist across generations. And in this patient unfolding, there was a subtle satisfaction, a sense that the world is slowly, gently being shaped through effort, reflection, and continuity. Capitalism's presence became nearly invisible, yet deeply pervasive, woven into the fabric of daily life. It touched homes, workplaces, and distant markets alike, moving quietly through human aspiration, guiding, observing, and absorbing the patterns of ambition and care. Its influence was not loud or immediate, but steady, patient, and reflective, like the soft turning of seasons or the gradual growth of a forest. In this gentle continuity, capitalism found its quiet power, a reminder that transformation often unfolds imperceptibly, carried on the steady, contemplative rhythms of human thought and endeavor. And as centuries passed, the system settled into the world, quietly shaping life, opportunity, and imagination, a calm presence beneath the surface of everyday existence.